The 2020 campaign is over, and it's been a lot.
Give me that. Give me that.
Come on.
Will you shut up, man?
Listen,
And so much has been at stake.
The 2020 campaign really illuminated the divisions in this country, not necessarily red versus blue, but rural versus urban. And this is the new America we're covering as political reporters.
The takeaway from the 2020 election is that we are more divided than ever.
This election and seeing the conspiracy theories about the election take hold and take root has been eye-opening, and it's just sort of underlines for me how important it is as a journalist to be clear and direct with readers about what is true and what is absolutely not true.
Washington Post reporters interviewed thousands of people around the country and filed hundreds of stories. So I wanted to talk about what we learned.
Oh, there we go. Hey, Libby, how are you?
Hi, Amy.
Can you see that I'm wearing sweatpants?
All right, hang on.
Okay.
Your backdrop is better than mine.
All right, Libby, looks like everything checks out and we are at speed. We're rolling.
All right, we're going to talk to 20 people today, Billy.
After every presidential campaign, I think we try to take stock of kind of what worked and what didn't.
What's one of the important or interesting things that we should be watching in American politics going forward?
Well, I think the most important question is whether President-elect Biden can kind of break the fever of partisan polarization. He campaigned on it.
Is it going to be a transformational presidency, or is it going to be sort of a placeholder type presidency?
Joe Biden has described himself as a bridge between generations in the Democratic Party. He picked Kamala Harris as his vice president in part because he wanted somebody younger who could kind of carry that torch forward. But she's not necessarily the automatic heir apparent to Biden.
I think that she had trouble in the primary sort of carving out her own niche. She doesn't necessarily stand for any particular issue. And so I think the next 4 years will be really important for her to sort of remodel herself as standing for something, as being someone that you look to and you know exactly what you're getting.
I think it's going to be sort of fascinating to see the different strains of the Democratic Party and sort of the disagreements that a lot of people still have over the future of the party.
The youthquake that Bernie Sanders predicted and wanted to bring out didn't happen on the left, at least at the polls.
We've seen something called rage giving develop this cycle, where a lot of people's decision to donate to a campaign or a candidate is really driven by them being pissed off, or even just like a really overwhelming emotion of being moved by someone's campaign.
Okay, big picture, one of the things I'm looking at is how the Republican Party is going to restructure itself. It's at a very pivotal moment after the Trump era.
What happens to Trump voters? What happens to, the 70 plus million people who voted for President Trump?
Will they rally around other Republican candidates? Will they simply wait until 2024 and hopefully vote for either Donald Trump or Donald Trump Jr. or who knows who at that point in time?
There was this sense that once Trump was out of office, all of these lawmakers who had been silent would suddenly regain their moral compasses and their courage. But a lot of these members in states and in the House and the Senate, Donald Trump still poses a real threat to them.
This is not a president who's going to ride off into the sunset and retire and not be heard from again. I think Trump is going to play a very active role in the day-to-day political debate. He might even run again for president in 2024. That's something he's told advisors he wants to do.
It takes a lot of oxygen out of other candidates who thought they would be running in 2024. And it really holds people like Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy, who may have thought that they were free of Donald Trump. They're not free of him.
I can't think of many elections where somebody got 47% of the vote and the party said, all right, let's do that again. let's take that and run that play in the next election. But Trump kind of is forcing them into that stance.
Well, you should not be watching Donald Trump's Twitter feed. My feeling is once he leaves the presidency, we should all take a rest from paying attention to what he says.
So how will the 2020 election affect how you cover politics?
I'm really interested in the emergence of
underrepresented groups and communities that we don't tend to look for them in.
What I'm really, really interested in is Hispanic and Asian American voter registration. I think that'll be quite crucial, or it has been already quite crucial in some of these swing states.
For those of us who happen to be or identify as Latinos or Hispanics, I think the focus on the diversity of the voters across this country and voters of color was stunning, because we've been talking about this a long time.
Voters of color, Latino voters, some Black male voters voted for the Republican nominee. So I'm curious to know what that was about, whether they felt angry and anxious and wanted to lash out at the system, or whether they saw something in there that offered hope for them.
The media really swung at every pitch that Trump threw over the plate. Part of our job, it's not just separating fact from fiction, but it's also separating things that are significant and worth paying attention to from things that are just essentially political theater.
I think in terms of gender, one of the most surprising, biggest stories that we saw was the success of Republican women. We saw at least 17 Republican women come into the House of Representatives, which is unprecedented.
The 2020 election to me underscores that operatives, people who spend their lives trying to analyze data and politics and people and the decisions they make, don't know as much as they think they do. And neither do the people like me who talk to those operatives, and neither do the politicians who listen to them.
I think we're still far too overconfident in how well we know what's going to happen in the election. Because Biden winning was not a surprise, because we've been so prepared by polls for Biden to win, there's been so much focus not on what Biden did, how he won, but rather on what Trump did. Trump's success was the new thing. So it's rare to see an election where you analyze how the loser did so well.
I'm going to be really wary and skeptical, especially of state-level polling going forward.
So why should we bother looking at polls?
Polls have always been asked to be more precise than they can be. They're not able to really tell the difference in a very close election. What is really important is that we need to understand what the public thinks. There aren't a lot of better ways than accurate polls to measure that.
In 2016, I felt like I knew the polls were off because I was talking to voters and was on the ground traveling around the country. And this time, I felt sort of detached.
How much did the coronavirus pandemic affect how you could do your reporting?
You can't tell the story of American politics well without talking to people on the ground.
During a pandemic and from your living room, to make sure that you're reaching a lot of people, literally hundreds of Facebook messages to strangers a week. It's, finally connecting with one of those people and then asking them to connect you with all of their friends and talking to them and then connecting with their friends. The phone tree system is exhausting.
I think one of the most interesting and depressing things has been just the sheer amount of misinformation and disinformation that's out there. And I think that was especially hard, especially during the pandemic when you were interviewing people, but you can't be face-to-face. I think when you have face-to-face interviews with people in person, sometimes that can take the edge off of the mistrust they have of the media and things like that.
What's one of your biggest takeaways from the 2020 campaign?
That everything is connected. It was not unusual to be talking to somebody about whether they're going to vote for Trump or not, and to segue into the death of George Floyd or into disparate reactions to the pandemic or into protests in the streets of America.
One of my biggest takeaways from the election is that we are primed to have one of our most divided governments in recent American history.
The percentage of eligible voters who voted was the highest since 1908. I think the impact that both of those candidates had on turning out people to vote for them is something that I think we're going to still be studying years from now.
People aren't as cynical as I think Washington makes politics out to be. I met, so many voters and organizers and volunteers who were really happy with their political choices and passionate about what they were doing.
One of the things I learned this cycle is really how fragile our democratic institutions are and how much
They both need coverage and need attention.
My takeaway is that those two groups of people, election administrators and voters, have more grit and determination to protect this democratic process that we celebrate in this country than any of us could have possibly imagined, because the election went really well. There was not widespread fraud. There were not widespread meltdowns of systems. And we have an outcome, and that's a victory for democracy.